Scientists are investigating shocking footage from Antarctica showing a mysterious giant pale humanoid creature beneath the Southern Ocean.
Somewhere in the freezing water off Antarctica, a camera was rolling when something pale and enormous rose toward the surface. And the crews who work that ocean swear it was real. The footage is grainy, the water is black, and the shape drifting through frame is the wrong shape, moving the wrong way, far too large to be anything the science books say exists down there. They gave it a name long before any lens ever found it. Pass in music. An afternoon. They settle in. They last for days. From that one anonymous post, one of the most unsettling legends the internet has ever produced was born. And the most disturbing part is not that it was finally caught on camera. It is what they say it looks like, the loneliest sea. Start with the water itself, because the water is half of this. There is a stretch of sea at the bottom of the world where the temperature sits barely a degree above freezing, and a man who falls into it does not have minutes to think about his life. He has minutes to feel his own heart slow, then stutter, then quit. No land breaks the wind. No harbor waits over the horizon. There is only the cold, the dark, and the long swell rolling in from 1,000 miles of nothing. The Southern Ocean is the loneliest sea on Earth, and that is not poetry. It is geography. It circles the entire planet at its lowest latitude. Music, one unbroken belt of water with no continent in its path to slow it down. So, the wind builds and builds across thousands of empty miles and raises the tallest sustained seas anywhere on the map. Storms here do not. It is Japanese, and it is not a word for a monster. Not beast, not leviathan, not kraken, not serpent. None of the old name sailors have always given the things in the deep. The word is Ningen, and Ningen means human. Human being. Sit with that for a second, because it is the entire machine. These were men staring at something the length of their ship, gliding through water deep enough to drown a skyscraper. And the word that came out of their mouths was not a word that put distance between that thing and themselves. It was the most intimate word there is. It was the word for us. And the moment you name something a human being, the story is already told. The image is already planted. You can be told it was ice. You can be told it was a trick of the light and a tired brain. And some quiet part of you will still see a face in the water. That is the genius of this legend. As you are about to see, it is also its fatal weakness. The unmapped dark. To understand any of this, you have to understand the place, because the place is the other half of the case. It is comforting to imagine the ocean is mapped. It is not. Vast stretches of the seafloor at the bottom of the world are still a blank, a smear of estimated depths and educated guesses. We have detailed photograph quality maps of craters on the moon 250,000 miles away. We have walked up there, and yet there are trenches and basins in the Southern Ocean no instrument has ever properly surveyed. More people have stood on the summit of the highest mountain on Earth than have ever reached the deepest parts of the sea. And here is where people go wrong. They assume a blank space on the map means a cover-up, secrecy, men in offices deciding what you are allowed to know. The truth is simpler and far more humbling. The ocean keeps its secrets for one plain reason. Almost no one is ever there. The water is too violent to sit and watch, too cold to linger in, too far from anywhere for a casual eye to ever wander past. For most of human history, only a small handful of working crews on long, brutal contracts ever laid eyes on this water at all. There is no conspiracy of silence. There is only absence. So, when you ask why there is no clean photograph, the honest answer has nothing to do with secrecy. It has to do with how few eyes have ever been down there to see anything at all. The men who saw, which brings us to the eyes that were. The accounts that built this legend did not come from drunk tourists leaning off a cruise ship rail or from teenagers with overactive imaginations. They trace back to research and survey crews on long deployments. Men working some of the hardest jobs the sea has to offer. Whale researchers, fisheries observers, survey teams logging ice and water temperature and conditions that would break most of us inside a week. These were seasoned professionals. Men who measured their experience not in trips, but in seasons, in winters, in long stretches away from anything that resembled home. And they knew this sea. They knew its moods better than the streets of the towns they grew up in. They could read it the way you read a familiar face. Think about what a life like that does to a man's eyes. Someone who has spent a decade watching for whales can tell you at half a mile in bad light whether that disturbance on the surface is a spout or just spray torn off a wave by the wind. He does not have to think about it. He knows. These are people whose entire professional worth rests on never mistaking one thing for another, on reporting exactly what is in front of them. So, when men like that separately, on different ships in different years, describe the same impossible shape in the water, you do not get to wave it away. You sit up, you listen. And the strangest thing about every one of these accounts is that they begin the same way, always. So, before we step out onto that deck with the first of them, before he turns from the rail and calls out for someone, anyone, to tell him he is not losing his mind, do one thing for me. Subscribe. Because the moment that man opens his mouth, this stops being a story you are hearing and starts being one you are standing inside, and the case files waiting on the other side of this one go deeper into that dark dark than this. Stay with me. How it begins. It starts in the half-darkness of the polar twilight. Not true black, but that strange sourceless gray that hangs over the Southern Ocean in the dead hours where everything seems drained of color. The water and the sky and the deck all the same shade of old weathered bone. The kind of light where your eyes strain for something to lock onto and find nothing. Cold has crept into the man at the rail the way it always does on a long watch. Not as a feeling anymore, but as a fact, settled deep in the hands and the jaw. His mind has gone slack and quiet. He is counting the minutes until someone relieves him. And that is when he notices something. A pale patch low in the water off the bow, lighter than the sea around it, sitting just beneath the surface or breaking it slightly. His first thought is the most natural thought in the world out there. Of course it is ice. It is the most common thing in that water. Pale, low, half-submerged, drifting. He has seen 10,000 pieces of it. He barely registers it. There is no fear in him at all. There is nothing in him but the dull wish to be warm again. He looks away to do his job, to check an instrument, to write a number in a log, to wipe the cold spray off his face. A handful of seconds, no more, and then he looks back. And this is the detail that turns the blood cold in every version of this story. The ice has changed position, not drifted, not bobbed on a swell, moved. It has traveled across his field of view in a way that drifting ice simply does not. And it is wrong somehow that he cannot place yet. The way a familiar room is wrong when one piece of furniture has been shifted a foot to the left in the dark. He stares harder, and he realizes the worst part. It is moving against the current, slowly, steadily, like it has somewhere to be. Against the current. This is the hinge the whole thing turns on, so stay with it. Ice has no will of its own. Ice goes where the water and the wind take it. It surrenders to the sea. It does not pick a direction and hold it. It does not push against the flow of the water around it. But this pale shape, whatever it was, held its line. It moved like something that had decided where it was going. And that is the one thing a man cannot talk himself out of. He can rationalize a shape in the dark. Of course he can. The human mind does it all day long. He can tell himself it was a weird slab of ice, an odd reflection, a tired brain making patterns out of nothing. He can argue his way back to calm, and most nights, on most watches, that is exactly what a man does. He blinks, he shakes it off, he looks at his instruments, and the cold gray sea is just the cold gray sea again. But you cannot argue your way out of intention. You cannot explain away the impression that the thing in the water had made a choice, that it was going somewhere, that somewhere did not depend on the current or the wind at all. What the witnesses say undid them was never the size, never the color, not even the shape. It was the sense of purpose. It was not what it looked like. It was what it seemed to want. And want is the word that ends a man's ability to sleep. A piece of ice does not want anything. A current does not want anything. The whole cold machinery of that ocean, the wind and the swell and the freezing black water, none of it wants. It simply moves. So the instant a man becomes certain that the pale thing below him wanted, he has crossed a line he can never step back over, because he has decided, somewhere beneath thought, that the thing is alive and aware and choosing. It was not what it looked like. It was what it seemed to want. And then the man does the thing that lifts this above one bad night and one tired pair of eyes. He does not keep it to himself. He grabs the nearest crewman. He points across the black water and demands to know if the other man sees it too. A second man comes to the rail, sometimes a third, and they stand there together, shoulder to shoulder in the brutal cold, breath fogging in front of them, watching the same pale form glide past the hull. A single witness can be mistaken. Several men, awake, sober, professional, all locked on the same patch of water at the same moment, are far harder to dismiss. They argue about it for years afterward, and the thing they argued about most was not that they had seen it. It was the shape, because the shape was wrong. The wrong shape. These were men who knew whales. That has to land before anything else makes sense. A whale is not a mystery to a survey crew at the bottom of the world. It is practically a coworker. They had watched humpbacks roll and breach 1,000 times. They knew the slow gray hump of a mink breaking the surface to breathe. They knew the broad black back of a right whale lying heavy in the swell, like a capsized boat. Every one of those animals has a logic to it, a shape you can name, a movement you can predict. A whale rises, it blows, it dives, and the body follows the head in one smooth, familiar arc. There is nothing about a whale that puzzles a man who has spent 10 years on this ocean. He could name the species from the shape of the spout alone, in the dark, half asleep. This puzzled them, and that, more than anything, is what these men kept coming back to. It was pale where every animal they knew was dark, and it did not move like a thing that breathes air and dives for it. It moved like something built for the water itself, something that belonged down there in a way a whale never quite does. Turned, the witnesses say, the way a swimmer turns. Not the roll of a whale, not the flick of a fish. A turn that had a torso in it. A turn that pivoted around a center, the way a human body pivots in a pool when it reaches the wall and pushes off. And once a man has seen a shape turn like that, he cannot unsee it. He starts looking for the rest of it. He starts looking for the part, and the part parts were the worst of all. The arrangement, because what these men described again and again across different ships and different years was not a random blob of pale flesh. It had parts, and the parts sat exactly where you would least want them to sit. At the top, a bulk, a mass shaped the way a head and a pair of shoulders are shaped, rounded at the crown, broadening below. The silhouette a person makes standing with their back to you in dim light. The one your eye finds in a crowd without trying. Below that bulk, long pale appendages trailing down and out into the dark, moving with a slow, deliberate looseness that no fin and no flipper has. And the men who got the longest look, the ones whose voices dropped when they finally talked about it years later, described those appendages ending in something worse. A hand. 5 pale digits spread in the water. And in the worst versions, that hand was not still. It opened. It closed slowly, as if the thing were testing the water, or reaching for something just out of its grasp, or just flexing the way you flex a stiff hand in the cold. A shape can be ice. A pale mask can be a trick of the half-light. You can build an innocent explanation for almost everything on that list. But a hand that opens and closes is not something the mind files under coincidence. It files it under fear. It is the kind of detail that follows a man home, that waits for him in the dark of his own bedroom months later, 1,000 miles from any ocean. Some of the men who reported it described doing the math against their will, right there at the rail. If that bulk on top was a head, and those were shoulders, then the hand they were watching open and close was the right size for a creature longer than the boat they were standing on. That was the thought none of them could put back in the box. Not that there was a pale shape in the water, that the pale shape had a scale, and the scale was monstrous, and every proportion of it lined up with the proportions of the men doing the watching. And the crews who somehow drifted closer than that saw worse still. Legs or tail. This is also the point where the accounts split. And the split is its own kind of interesting, because the witnesses do not agree on what hung below that head and those arms. Some were certain they saw 2 legs, long, pale, trailing down into the black, kicking slowly, the way a swimmer kicks when they're barely moving, just holding their place in the water. A full human shape then, blown up to the length of a freighter, treading water in a sea that should kill a human body in minutes. But others, a different set of crews, a different set of music nights, describe something else entirely below the torso. Not legs at all. A single smooth taper. The body narrowing from those broad shoulders down to a point and ending in a fin. The whole lower half fused into one powerful tail. A mermaid shape if you wanted the soft word for it. Though no man on those decks would have reached for so gentle a word in the moment. And that disagreement cuts both ways, which is exactly why it matters. A skeptic hears 2 different descriptions and says, there it is. Proof they are inventing. Proof there is no fixed thing out there to see. A believer hears the same 2 accounts and says, of course they differ. They saw it from different ships at different angles and different light. And the one thing that never changes ship to ship, year to year, is the head and the shoulders. The top of it is always us, the face. And then there are the few accounts almost no one wants to repeat. The witnesses who got closest, the ones whose ship drifted near enough or whose angle was just right that they say they saw the front of the thing. The face. They describe eyes set forward, not on the sides of the head the way a fish carries its eyes, the way nearly everything that swims carries its eyes. Forward, both eyes facing the same direction. The way a predator's eyes face, the way your eyes face right now reading this. Sideways eyes belong to the hunted, to prey that needs to watch the whole horizon at once for the thing coming to eat it. Forward eyes belong to the hunter, to the animal that has stopped worrying about what is behind it because it is the thing behind everything else. Forward eyes belong to us, and forward eyes were the last thing those crews wanted to find looking back out of the water at the bottom of the world. And in the worst of those tellings, the eyes did not stare blankly out at the sea. They turned. They found the men at the rail, and for one long frozen moment, the thing in the water looked back at the people who were looking at it, calm, unhurried, as if it had been watching the ship far longer than the ship had been watching it. That is the image this legend exists to leave behind. Not a monster lunging, not jaws or claws or violence, just a pale human-shaped giant in the freezing dark, returning your stare and understanding it. So, the obvious question is the one the title of this video promises to answer. If grown men keep seeing this thing across decades and oceans, then where is the proof? Caught on camera. Here is the honest version. Images do exist. They circulate. Grainy stills passed around for years, supposedly snapped from the decks of working vessels. A blurry white form in churning gray water. A pale mass that reads as ice, or a whale carcass, or a smear on a cold lens, or something with shoulders, depending entirely on the eye looking at it. And there is the most famous piece of so-called evidence of all. A long white shape pulled from a satellite mapping tool lying just off the Antarctic coast that believers have shared for over a decade as the day the Ningen was finally photographed from space. And here is where this channel does not trade in fabricated proof. None of them has ever been authenticated. Not one of these images carries a verified verified date, a verified vessel, a named photographer who has stood behind it, or a chain of custody an investigator could actually follow. The satellite shape has the most ordinary explanations of all, from a glint of sun on water to a stranded iceberg to plain image compression. The deck photos are exactly the kind of low-resolution, badly lit frames the human eye quietly fills in on its own. So, the footage does not close the case. If anything, the footage is the whole case in miniature. Just clear enough to make you lean in, just blurry enough that your mind is forced to supply the rest. And your mind, every single time, supplies a body shaped like its own. The believer's case. Strip it all back to where it actually came from. And the trail runs not through a logbook, but through a screen. The story started spreading in the mid-2000s on Japanese internet forums, handed from one anonymous user to the next in the small hours of the night. And the shape of the telling never changed. Someone knew someone, a relative who had worked a ship in the far south, a friend of a friend who came back from down there changed, who went quiet whenever it came up, who carried it like a weight. With every retelling it grew, a sharper detail here, a few more meters of length there. But the believers are not standing on a forum post. They are standing on two things that are genuinely hard to knock down. The first is consistency. Scattered witnesses on different vessels in different years, separated by oceans and languages, and the simple fact that they never met keep landing on the same shape, same impossible pale color, same vast length, same arrangement, a head and shoulders on top, long limbs below, the unmistakable logic of a body built like ours. And the believer asks the question that deserves a real pause. If this is nothing but tired eyes and frightened minds, why does the imagination keep building the exact same monster? Why never a tentacle, never a serpent, never any of the thousand other things the dark could throw up? The second thing is the geography, and on this ground they are nearly unbeatable because the deep down there is real. The crushing dark is real, and science itself keeps quietly admitting the ocean hides giants we never knew were there. The giant squid was a sailor's tall tale for centuries, dismissed as the raving of frightened men, until a body finally washed ashore. Sharks that glow in the black water were confirmed within living memory. New whales, new fish, things with no name at all are pulled up from the deep every year. So, to say the Southern Ocean could be hiding something enormous is not the raving of a believer. It is very nearly common sense, the quiet answer. But here is where the case finally turns, and it turns on 5 words. Could hide is not the same as does hide. The deep can conceal almost anything. It can hide a 60-foot animal in lightless water no human eye will ever reach. What it cannot do is hide a 30m humanoid swimming at the surface in plain view beside a ship in the gray light of dawn. The moment a thing is seen at the surface, it is by definition no longer hidden. A creature that size, breathing, surfacing, traveling those waters for as long as the legend claims, would not be a secret whispered on a forum. It would be on every research deck, in every net, washed up on every southern beach, photographed not once in a blur, but 10,000 times in hard daylight. The very thing that makes the deep a perfect hiding place is the very thing these sightings violate. You cannot be both unseeable in the abyss and casually visible at the rail. Both cannot be true at once, and the legend needs both. So, the most likely answer is the quiet one, and it is almost gentle next to the legend it replaces. Sculpted ice, carved by wind and wave into a shape with a swell like shoulders and a ridge like a head, drifting in light so dim that everything wears the color of old bone. And a human brain, wired across 1,000,000 years to find faces in shadow, to find bodies in noise, to never once miss the shape of another person, doing exactly what it was built to do. The mind that survived long enough to pass on its genes was the mind that saw a face in the dark and reacted, even when no face was there. 1,000 false alarms cost nothing. One missed predator cost everything. Put that ancient machinery on a frozen deck at the loneliest hour of the night, exhausted, cold, straining at a gray shape in gray water, and it will hand its owner a head, shoulders, a turning torso, a hand. It will hand him a human being. And once the first man said the word, every man after him saw the word. So, maybe that is the real reason this legend will not die long after the rational answer should have buried it. Because the Ningen was never really about a creature. It is about the edges of the map, the cold, crushing distances where almost no one watches and almost no one goes. And it is about the oldest fear we carry. Not that something monstrous lives out there in the dark, but that something out there has a face we would recognize. Eyes that find us at the rail and look back and seem for one frozen moment to know exactly what we are. The last question. So now the case sits with you. You have stood on the deck. You have seen the pale patch that should have been ice and was not. The shape that held its line against the current. The hand that opened and closed in the black water. The footage just clear enough to lean toward and just blurry enough to never settle. And you have heard the quiet explanation that fits almost all of it. Almost. Music. So, be honest with me down in the comments. When you weigh it all together, the consistency, the geography, the witnesses who knew that sea better than their own streets, what do you actually believe is moving at the bottom of the world? A trick of ice and a frightened mind reaching for a face, or something the science books books insist cannot exist. Swimming slow and deliberate just beneath the waves. Wearing a shape it was never supposed to wear out there. And whichever way you lean, answer me this one. Which single detail is the one you cannot explain away? Is it the movement against the current, the forward-facing eyes, or the name itself, the word those crews reached for before anyone could talk them out of it? Leave your answer below and tell me where you stand. Subscribe before you go, because the next case file waiting at the edge of the map is colder and darker and far harder to close than this one.